Well, boys, looks like you started the fun without me.
You're all sick. Every last one of you.
We're going to need a bigger gun.
What's the matter? You scared of things that go boom, boom?
Give me one goddamn reason why I shouldn't grow your goddamn brains all over that goddamn wall.
I'm joining Michael Kester this evening. My name is Eric, and as an audience, as a collective body of listeners, you are in fact listening to Double Feature. For now, until until the show starts.
Until we mention chapters, and then
about a minute and a half in, when you find out it's not Rocky V and the Machine Girl, but actually Kids and Happiness, you're probably going to bail. Only kidding. You like Rocky V and the Machine Girl. You think that's a fine setup.
I think, Rocky V and the Machine Girl is a great double feature.
Well, we're going to spoil both of those movies. We have a feature in our show called Chapters.
It's a segment
it's
of
a
our
utility.
show.
It's a utility you can use. Yeah, it is also a segment where I talk about chapters for 20 minutes. I'm going to make it short. There's chapters. Look it up. Something else you should look up just briefly. If you're just now joining us here in Double Feature Land, Rocky V and the Machine Girl might seem like a strange double feature.
In fact, it's possibly, I can think of one pairing that I can think of would be a worse episode to
the last two Rocky Asia shows. Would that be?
I think that would be the worst.
Was that actually your answer?
It was, yeah.
Oh, that's great. The Kill Bill ones were fine. We did, I don't know what happened there. Well, here's what happened. So we did Rocky and Shogun Assassin, and then we did Rocky 2 and Sex and Fury. We took a little break from our strict Asian cinema regimen, and then we did Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 with Rocky 3 and 4.
Right.
Now we are back in true form here. We are in the third wave,
right?
The final wave of our Rocky films paired up with discovering Asian cinema centered around Kill Bill.
Yeah, see, the thing with Rocky is Rocky doesn't really come in waves. Well, maybe the sixth one is a different wave.
I don't know. We'll find out.
But the Asian films, since they're not actually all sequential, they're kind of in groups, in pairs.
So we did old Asian cinema. We did American-influenced Asian cinema.
And now we're doing Asian-influenced by American cinema, influenced by Asian cinema.
Oh my God. We should start with Rocky V. This is a capsule film for me.
Yeah.
Well, it's the film's from 1990. It's how I remember the early 90s.
Okay.
The early 90s being definitively different than when we talked about The Matrix, that being the late.
Yeah.
The late 90s for some reason is Spawn and trench coats.
Yeah, that's true.
Spikes.
That did happen. Bad music. Oh my God.
Yeah, there was a lot of bad music, probably still in my iTunes library. Have you heard that Korn dubstep album yet, by the way?
Refuse.
No, you're right. There was a lot of bad music in the late 90s. But the early 90s had its fair share of that awful kind of Rob bass.
Yeah.
The Joey Ellis song in this movie, Go For It. I mean, I think that was, every Rocky film seems to have a song composed for it.
Yeah.
I can't find that song anywhere but Rocky V. If you Google it, all that comes up is videos from Rocky V. So I think that's probably what it is. But there was a lot of that. MC Hammer, I think, is on the soundtrack.
Oh my God.
If you watched In Living Color during the early 90s, all that kind of music that was on there was a very, I call it bad because it sounds very cheap and it has this kind of
bad quality.
It's kitschy, you know what I mean?
Sure.
It's kitschy, but there was stuff coming, NWA and a lot of legitimate stuff.
A lot of
hip hop.
Hip hop was really in its heyday in the late 80s and early 90s. That's when Ice-T got started. That's when Snoop Dogg and The Chronic all came out.
Right.
And then also that's where alternative rock started, same time.
Sure. So when you say bad music, you meant alternative rock specifically.
Mostly.
Well, that's what happened to rap. Is it got so popular that we had pop rap. We had MC Hammer.
Sure.
We also had Dirty City Streets, and that's I think that's a lot of why this is kind of a capsule film. Why it feels like that it's the scene where he's telling his son about the hustle, right? And
Sure.
His son is talking about urban blight, which is we've never really covered urban blight. It's that sort of, when I think about that, I think about Spike Lee films, the early, like Do the Right Thing, that kind of stuff. Maybe a little bit when we talked about Candyman, because I know we talked about Cabrini Green and that area of Chicago.
It's like Sesame Street with more litter.
Yeah, it's definitely got a weird Sesame Street thing to it. That's very strange that you mentioned that. A lot of boarded up windows. There's just a kind of look to urban blight. There's almost a visual aesthetic to it. It's one of those things that I don't know. Maybe for me, the reason I stick to that is we still have that in Chicago. You know, that was
That's
very
true.
90s, but the South Side of Chicago is infamous for that.
Well, and it's not even just the South Side. If you find yourself in the right areas of
sure.
even the North or the West Side,
Sure.
the area that I'm specifically thinking of to caricature urban blight in Chicago is the Little Italy neighborhood. I don't know if you've been down
Oh,
there.
no. Where's
but
that at?
It's down by Taylor and Ashland.
Oh, okay, sure.
Off Taylor Street. And it just, I mean, it looks like gritty Sesame Street. That is.
I mean, it's the next best thing to having a time machine. You go down there and it really is. It feels like the early 90s. Part of that is the city develops around those areas.
Sure.
And that kind of causes, I mean, that's one of the causes of urban blight. The time capsule thing is a side product. It's not the reason I love this chapter of the Rocky saga.
I
just
love
happens
it
to
because there are fewer montages and fewer robots than the previous installment.
So you are catching on. Yeah, right from the beginning, the movie's a little bit different than the other Rocky films we've seen. We get our usual previous on Rocky, but there's also the freeze frames. You know, it becomes a title sequence that makes it a little bit different.
Sure.
I think this, of all the recaps we've gotten, since we got the very first one and it was still fresh and humorous, this has actually been, you know, legitimately speaking, the best recap. We're doing something a little bit different, and it feels like, we're not just doing this because all the other films did it. It's kind of honoring that tradition, but putting a little bit of a spin on it. It's a small thing, but you know, when we get through that, we cut directly to naked Sylvester Stallone.
Or Jessica Alba.
Well, it's the scene from Machete. Isn't that
It's the
weird?
scene from Machete where Jessica Alba's in the shower completely naked, but you don't get to see anything.
Yeah, that's
It's the artful coy,
Mhm.
except it's Sly Stallone. And it also, that means it came first, and that means that I guess Jessica
Could be
Alba
a
was
callback.
actually just doing the Sly Stallone thing. And then you get into a really weird sexual thing for me.
Bizarre.
But Rocky's not about the sex. He's about the heart.
Naked Stallone is not the director this time around. This is, I remember you asking me about that, I think on the first show, and I refused to answer at the time. But he is the star of this film and the sole writer this time around, which is kind of interesting. But he's not the director. We have John G. Avildsen back from the original Rocky.
Okay.
So he kind of went off to do a couple of the Karate Kid movies and a couple other things.
Three Ninjas
And-
Kick Back.
Well, he did 3 fucking Karate Kid movies, and then he comes back and he does the 5th Rocky. And this is the only other movie in the franchise not directed by Stallone. We will see him come back to do the 6th one.
Rocky Balboa.
So you start to get this idea that this one's going to be a little bit different. They hit you with some pretty heavy stuff right from the beginning, but we immediately fall back into, you know, Rocky gets off the plane and
Right.
Richard Gant comes out, not as Don King, but as
Right.
Duke.
Yeah.
More important, not only is he not playing Don King, but he's also not eating a heart, which is
That's
good.
also, yeah. We haven't seen him on the show not eating a heart.
We joke about this on here all the time, but this is actually the actor from the 9th Jason film, the Jason film with the aforementioned heart eating. And, you know, just as intense in this film as he is wolfing down hearts. That's fine. But what I love about this scene is that this is almost a self-aware moment where, you know, Rocky's giving his usual, I'm back from Russia, and here's some little jokes and
And I'm
whatever.
a nice guy, and you know what's going on, America.
Everybody loves me. Yeah, what's up? Welcome me back, America. And Duke comes out to challenge him or whatever. And a woman stands up and she just goes, isn't this a bad time for a challenge? I mean, he
Yeah.
just got off the plane. It's the most rational thing anyone in any of these movies has ever fucking said.
Yep.
You thought it would get more rational when Mick was no longer in the series. But then we got a robot, and that got a
Yeah.
little nuts. And finally, someone just stands up and goes, you know, this happens every fucking time. Can we just, who gave this guy a microphone?
Yeah.
Can we just go back to reality for a moment? And I guess we do, right? Rocky retires. I mean, how much more do you hit? He actually retires. Not like the last 2 films where,
Right.
Rocky, you got a bad heart. You got to retire.
Sure.
You know, Adrian doesn't want you to box anymore. You got to retire.
Rocky, previously in the Rocky films, Rocky, he bows out. He
Sure.
doesn't retire. He's out
He
of the
bows
game.
out until he has a press
Yeah.
conference and
Yeah.
someone challenges him.
He basically, he sits down and he goes, okay, how long can I sit out before I officially need to train extra hard to get back in.
Yeah, that's it, right? He only stays out of the game long enough to necessitate a montage.
Yeah.
That's really the formula. And so he has Adrian talking him out of it. He's in his 40s. He has CSP. You know, he's having all of these medical complications. And so he decides, this is it. I'm actually... He kind of has this moment during the press conference where he just gives up. He just says, fuck this. You know what? I'm not going to stand around. I've been here when this happens before. I'm going to peace out. He thinks about it and he legitimately goes, I'm done. Mm-hmm. And then he runs into financial trouble.
Yeah.
Because Paulie fucked up.
Because fucking Paulie.
Well, this is great too, because you had the press conference. You thought, oh, here comes a new challenger. And he doesn't do that. And then you find out he's out of money.
Right.
So now you're thinking, oh, now we're back to the formula.
Sure.
Now Rocky is hard up for cash and he's going to... But he says fuck it to that too.
Yeah.
He has that conversation where he thinks, well, what am I going to go back to commercials? What am I really going to do?
Says all I can do is fight and I don't want to fight. So I don't know what we're going to do. And
Fuck it, I'm going to stay retired and we're going to move back to...
Paulie's
back
been
to the
jilted
bird.
by his robot, so he's got to stick with us.
So then we're back to Urban Blight, Philadelphia. We're back to the gym and the humble home and the no money.
Sure.
And, you know, we're back to seeing Mick, too.
Yeah, we're back to basically the first film.
It is.
It's all
certainly
back.
Is. Even the neighborhood priest
right, yeah.
comes back, leaning out the window.
The only exception being that Rocky has a kid who's completely...
he educates Rocky a little bit. He plays a couple different roles that... You know, in the way that Adrian was kind of Rocky's smarter counterpart back in the day, or even just to reconnect with a younger Rocky. He was never quite as young in this series as his son is in this movie, who I believe is actually Stallone's son.
I think so too.
But between him and Tommy, that's a way to kind of bring in younger Rocky.
Yeah, exactly. The two of them combined are younger Rocky, but they're so separate, and they have to be separate because at the end of the day, Rocky can't. He's not ready to fight himself.
So usually on the Rocky shows, especially when we're doing a Cold War story, we're talking really heavily about themes. And I think all these elements we're describing might include a theme about returning to your roots. That seems to be what we're getting at here. But I feel like the actual story that Stallone's written for this is talking more about, it's talking about some pretty interesting things. One, we have his son. You know, there's a lot of different themes that play into that. There's this tried and true cinematic story, especially in maybe not coming of age films, but movies for children, of a father who's absent from their lives.
Sure.
A dad who works too much and
spends too much time at the tables or at the bar.
You got it. Arrested Development made fun of that in talking about the son who's waiting outside all day to go fishing with his dad, right? That's the joke about that cliche. But this is a really odd kind of paternal jealousy we have here, right? I mean, this is his son wants to get to know his father. Sure. And hang out with him and just be around his dad. And his dad isn't at his job necessarily. I mean, I guess for Rocky, we could have done a story where Rocky's always off boxing and, defending his honor and making his money back and fixing Paulie's problems. But that's not it. Rocky's retired now. And in that moment where his son hopes, oh, he's retired, I'll get to know my dad. Instead, he hangs out with Tommy and treats Tommy like his son. He basically replaces his son with Tommy. Here's a protege that I'm going to raise. And so that's an interesting turn on a classic theme anyways, but they throw some more stuff in there. I mean, the entire story of Tommy, it's not just about he raises this guy to, carry on his name, carry the torch for him. Instead, there's this sort of turn where he trains, Tommy defects, and then he has to defeat Tommy. Yeah. In a street fight, nonetheless, which is kind of weird. So these are all things that are just interesting on a writing level, but it's definitely things that I think betray that usual Rocky formula in the best way possible. Mm-hmm. Rocky actually retires. The movie, as you mentioned, it's much lighter on montages. There's no final boxing match, which is another huge thing, right? The fact that there's a street fight instead of a boxing match is honestly, it's surprising. You get to the end and you have that street fight, and when the music starts to swell, you think, oh, this could be the end of the movie. Yeah. how are they going to top this?
Sure.
And as he lands those punches and everyone exchanges their final little quippy words,
Huzzah.
you realize that's the end. That's
the
how we're
final
ending
battle.
this. Mhm.
Normally, Rocky films end with the fight, freeze frame, credits.
Well, there's an extra we got out of the game moment
Sure.
to resolve this this conflict he was having with his son.
And you were saying that this was supposed to be the last Rocky film, so they had to wrap it up. They had to go and say, oh, well, it doesn't just end with a fight.
Well, they planned it to be the last.
Sure.
And you know, that's why the credits recount the previous films. But this being such a departure from the rest of the series, there was a very mixed reaction to that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think a lot of that comes from betraying the formula. From people sign up for these movies expecting the same thing over and over.
Expecting to see Rocky box.
Yeah,
for
expecting to see,
example.
yeah, definitely. And you get this story with Tommy kind of, you know, taking Rocky's place, and they're only focusing on him really from afar, from Rocky's point of view. So you're not in the ring. You don't have a motivational death. That
Right.
seems to be what has become a crutch for the series at this point. You'd never seen this before. You went into this expecting someone to die, right?
Yeah,
Expecting
I
there
was
to be
hoping it'd be Paulie. Always hoping
I know
it's
you did
Paulie.
mention that on the previous show, that Paulie would go on to train Rocky, and that may be his death curse. Is that where I'm going with that? You know what I mean. Instead, we're getting a story about luring Tommy down the dark side, and this kind of, Rocky movies always talking about show business, but
Sure.
that appeal to all that we kept Rocky away from, all that Mick kept Rocky away from the whole time. Tommy falling prey to that and what that does to him. Rocky's still interested in Tommy even after, he kind of defects. He's still cheering him on.
Sure.
He still takes pride in him. It's not really until, he's kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt. And then Tommy gets on TV and basically says, fuck off.
Yeah.
So not terribly unlike Rocky's own bottoming out, Stallone claims to have basically made this film for cash.
Huh.
He's unhappy with how it turned out, and honestly, most audiences really agreed with
It's
him.
probably the best one since the second one for me.
I think that might have a little to do with how you and I are watching them.
Yeah.
This is similar to revisiting the first film, which is a nice refresher, but it also defies what would by now in this franchise be a stale formula. When we're doing these things the way we do them, we're watching them as kind of a complete set. We're thinking about it like it's a franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Not just, I haven't seen a Rocky film in 10 years and now I'm watching a Rocky film. I really just want to be watching Rocky 1, but I'm watching Rocky 5 because it's in the theater. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people. But when we're considering the whole franchise, this is the kind of breath of fresh air that's really needed here. We need to stir things up. We need to defy a formula, do some more interesting. I mean, I think it's perfect at that.
I think so
It
too.
tells new stories with new themes. It reconnects with an old character somehow at the same fucking time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'd be happy if the series ended here. I'm not really sure, but we know now that we have one more left, and that might change, our take on this. Stallone, this is kind of weird too, especially for the first time we've ever seen this, maybe the first time I've ever heard of this even happening. Stallone basically wanted to redeem the character after this. A couple years or whatever after the movie, maybe immediately after, I don't know. He looked at this and he said, I wasn't satisfied with this movie. It was just me cashing in. Doesn't like it, right?
Right.
He makes 15 years later or something, he makes the sequel, and he made the sequel based on the fact that this was poorly received critically, financially, and that he was unhappy with it. And I've never heard of a sequel being made because the previous film did so poorly. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah,
Usually,
that's true.
especially with the fucking movies we watch on here, sequels are to cash in.
Right.
They are not because oh man, that last film was so bad. You know what? Let's really fix the Rocky
Right.
legacy and
Yeah.
create one more final film.
So I guess we move away from the fifth installment of our Rocky journey, and we travel back over the ocean to
You're
Asia.
you're loving this
I like it.
America-Asia thing. You really
feels
came
like
around
a journey
on this.
to me.
Yeah.
I love it. So as we mentioned before, we are into the third leg of
Yeah.
Asia craziness, which is back to the foreign films, and it's basically
This is the one I'm worried about, essentially.
This is the hardest one. The whole point of this entire process is to get anybody who's actually taking the ride with us, to get them to this point, and more importantly, to the next point.
Sure. To the crazier.
And have them understand why these movies exist and
Sure.
where they came from.
Yeah, for us to understand that, attempt to understand that, see if we can make everybody else who's in
Sure.
the same boat with us understand that.
It doesn't necessarily mean people have to like Machine Girl,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like it's a lot easier to enjoy Machine Girl when you know where its roots come from.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that is made so blatantly obvious
Sure.
in the very first scene of Machine Girl.
Well, yeah, the William Tell routine.
Yeah.
Well, this is great because my eyes lit up, right?
Yeah.
We have William Tell, and I thought, oh, yeah, I know this. We covered this. We covered this on Naked Lunch. This is William S. Burroughs doing William Tell. I mean, I know William Tell.
Sure.
I can get behind this. And there's a lot of Kill Bill going on in here. And we'll talk about the Kill Bill, but you know, that thing you mentioned of these modern Asian movies, we haven't discussed it a lot. And we'll probably talk about it a little bit more when we do the next one. But Asian extreme is a genre, much like the new French extreme,
Right.
and a lot of the old school American horror type of things we're seeing in other parts of the world. But Asian extreme is notably more challenging, or at least for me personally.
No, it
than
is.
the rest of the. It makes less sense to me.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do Machine Girl is because the storyline is almost too coherent.
Yeah, it almost stands out against all of the other stuff because of how much sense it makes.
Yeah, because of how easy it is to actually follow the storyline of Machine Girl.
Sure.
But in the beginning, it's still a little out of order because she's got her machine gun arm and we see her doing some fucking craziness.
Yeah.
But the blood squirts just like in Shogun Assassin.
Sure.
And she's sassy and sexy just like Sex and Fury.
Mm-hmm.
And everything is just very Kill Bill and stylized and everybody's jumping around and kicking ass. And
Just momentarily, I'm really happy with you. That this is, you told me as we're pairing this stuff up, you said we're going to center this whole thing around Kill Bill. The only thing I brought to the table here was, hey, maybe we'll do Asian stuff because I'm interested in all that, and I want to do all the Rocky films. And you crafted really this entire lineup of Asian films, and where to fit in Kill Bill and all of that, and I just went with it, and it could have been a disaster. That was a lot of trust, right?
Yeah.
Because
it's true.
I have seen all the Rocky movies, with the exception of the last one, which I'm saving for the show. I have seen none of the Asian movies, with the exception of Kill Bill, which, I mean, both of those are American films. So I just went with it.
Yeah.
I said, okay, Michael, maybe at the very worst, this will be a huge catastrophe, and I can just make fun of it, and it'll be 6 terrible episodes, which, I mean, at this point, we have 195 terrible episodes, so I'm not too worried about that. But in fact, when this happened, this was the final confirmation. In the first minutes of this, I saw the Kill Bill.
Yeah.
I fucking saw it, and I said, this all makes sense.
Yeah.
The plan has finally been validated.
Yeah, it's great. It's bizarre to see the two things blended again.
Yeah,
because when we first watched Kill Bill, it was weird watching Kill Bill after Shogun Assassin and Sex and Fury because it felt very clear that it was based
and also
on
strangely retroactive somehow. Right. I don't know in what direction to what direction.
Yeah.
But something about it, the pieces fell together. I remember how shocked we were on the second Kill Bill episode when Shogun Assassin came up. We both just kind of thought, wow, that was convenient, wasn't it?
Yeah. And now it's weird again seeing Machine Girl be this blend of, I mean, it's like, it's when you do your homework and you come to class and everything makes sense.
Yeah.
That's essentially what it feels like watching Machine Girl. And now imagine watching Machine Girl without this background.
Sure.
A lot of it, the style would be lost. You don't realize that it's supposed to be stylistic and it's campy in a really stylized way.
Sure.
You'd instead write it off as bad acting, poor filmmaking. Those Japanese people don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, you wouldn't understand the camp.
Right. But instead you get a very well executed, sexy action blood fest. And that's the big thing with moving back to the Asian stuff is it just gets more fucking violent.
Yeah, we did kind of mixing in a smaller amount of it. We also tackled a couple Takashi Miike things in the year 2. We joke about the nudity being the theme of year 4, But we really wanted to hit a lot of this Asian stuff.
Sure.
And unfamiliar cinema and kind of pair it with things that we had more of a handle on. And I think that's been really helpful in it too. You know, from the second we get the scene with her holding the picture up and there's the sound effects.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I just know, you know, I understand where this is coming from. I'm seeing it now. Everything's coming together. Or the camera, you know, showing the side of the actor's head,
Right.
and then they turn to face it. I mean, just these things stylistically. It could be Kill Bill. Maybe they're big Edgar Wright fans. I mean, who are we to actually say
you never
what's
really
derivative?
know.
Yeah, we can't make a full list of here's everything we think comes from
Yeah.
Kill Bill. There's obviously a mixed bag of this stuff.
Sure.
But it's undeniable, a lot of that overlapping background. Especially when we get something like a Hattori Hanzo reference.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah. Because it could be a Kill Bill thing, but you also were telling me that that's just apparently a big legend in Japan.
Yeah, it comes into popular culture a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't really talk about it on the show, but Hattori Hanzo in Kill Bill itself, that's the Sonny Chiba role.
Right.
He played Hattori Hanzo in Shadow Warriors in the 1980s, that Japanese TV thing that Tarantino apparently is super into.
Sure.
And you see Hattori Hanzo and the Hanzo name and Hanzo swords pop up in a lot of, more so in Japanese culture.
Right.
And, in various pieces of Asian cinema than over here. But you see that stuff here, too. And there's Shogun Assassin references here and there. I mean, it's small stuff where you
Sure.
can kind of feel like that's a little derivative.
Well, there's, you get the thing where she's looking out for her family and she's
Sure.
that's all about, what are they, the thing that I always remember about Shogun Assassin is the tagline,
Sure.
which is, they shall pay with rivers of their blood.
Right, yeah.
And I mean, that stands to reason with Machine Girl, right?
Yeah.
That is the underlying premise.
Sure. It's like you could be talking about the same fucking
Yeah.
movie, right? Yeah, so maybe they share influences. Maybe we're just talking about the genre as a whole, but
Sure.
the important part is this stuff all kind of blends together into, what we're seeing now. I mean, even if you were to ask the director specifically, I don't know that you could point to references that would be accurate so much as just, it's like when we were talking on the Equilibrium show about how Hong Kong influenced gunfighting.
Sure.
And turning the gun sideways and,
Which is absolutely the most inaccurate way to fire a gun. Thanks, Mythbusters.
Oh, what a good episode. And a good handful of episodes of our own that it's been since you mentioned Mythbusters on the show.
Gotta keep it current.
No, it was really good. My point is you could probably go back and really say, okay, here was the first movie that did that or what have you. But when you look at today's modern gun combat, you realize it's an amalgam of all of these
Sure.
different elements. And I think that's the same with Machine Girl. It reminds me of, in year one, we covered Battle Royale.
Yeah.
Right? And we haven't really talked about how Battle Royale weaves into all this stuff. But the most clear Kill Bill kind of tie-in is Ami, the titular Machine Girl.
Right.
Which may be a reference back to Gogo in the Kill Bill movies.
Sure.
Kiriyama, who played a similar role when she did, I think it was Chigusa in Battle Royale.
Yeah.
Which we know that, Tarantino, that was only a couple years prior, and he was a big fan, and that's kind of where
his
that...
favorite movie of the last 20 years or
Sure.
some shit. Yeah.
So he's a fan of that. He puts that character in there. So does that make this a reference to Kill Bill? Does it make it a reference to Battle Royale? Is it just a schoolgirl outfit, and that's been in places before 2003? That's obviously not
We
the
can't
first
give a
occurrence.
definitive answer. We don't have the man here to answer the
Who
question.
can actually say? Kiriyama was also in Ju-on, which is another kind of genre of Asian cinema that
American remade.
Yeah, we
The
talked about
American-
it in the first
Yeah.
year and never got around to covering it because
We probably
it's-
should.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we finally get a good kind of handle on this stuff, I think we can start tackling the ghost stories and the
Sure.
influences
Well, they get
back and forth
fucked
there.
up. Have you ever seen Uzumaki?
No, I haven't.
That one was so fucked up, America couldn't even remake it.
Well, in the meantime, we, make a call for Japanese cinema that's equally fucked up without the supernatural,
Sure.
and here we have it.
Instead, you just bend it on revenge. All of the films in this have been bent on revenge. Rocky's all about bringing himself up, and Japan's all about taking revenge.
Slicing it back down.
Um,
So Ami isn't actually played by Kiriyama, if I was making that really confusing. It's a different actor. She's played by Minash Yoshiro, who also worked with the same director from this movie on Robo Geisha.
Yeah,
which
I've
is
seen Robo-Geisha.
apparently something else in this kind of genre,
It's
right?
similar. It's a lot weirder. It's a lot more sci-fi. There's a lot more Transformers.
More camp, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, this movie, it almost looks subtle by comparison of
Yeah,
a lot of the
it's
posters and the trailers and stuff I've seen from these other movies.
Well, one of my favorite aspects of subtlety to Machine Girl,
Mm-hmm.
and I made it a little unfair because I kind of pointed it out to you, but that's because we have to do a show and you have to catch all the stuff. And it's kind
so
of
hard, by the way. It's so hard.
But one of my favorite things about Machine Girl is you've seen the poster, you know she has a fucking Gatling gun for an arm, FF7 style.
Yeah.
And you've seen the first scene of the movie where she's got the fucking gun on her left arm. And you're sitting there when she's back, you know, what is it, 3 days later, 2 weeks later, some shit?
Sure.
And you just sit there going, when did she lose her arm?
Yeah.
And they keep toying with it. She gets her arm deep fried in some family dinner, and
that's the same family dinner with the what are they serving? It's red blood and white dinner sauce. I believe is some kind of. It's so pretty before the fake head spoils the dinner.
Yeah,
and you get the blood-soaked camera, which is a big kind of visual thing they do with the movie. Constantly, there's so much blood; it's just raining down.
Yeah,
it's not a little bit of this kind of cute Children of Men, you know, or other movies where we've seen that. It's literally just streams of blood. It almost looks like the cabin fever, you know, wiped to red.
Yeah. And that happens on the scene where she finally loses her arm, which I think is, I first time I saw this, I lost my shit because the whole time I'm thinking, when did she lose her arm? When is she going to lose her arm? And it happens by mistake.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing.
There goes your arm.
So this is why I brought Takashi Miike up, because I want to ask you this. For the exact reason that people should be rolling their eyes at me right now.
Is Machine Girl have a better split in half than Ichi the Killer?
That's also a good question. I still think Kill Bill has the best one. It's the unfortunate thing about that. We have cartoonish violence. And every time we talk Miike, I mention cartoonish violence because that's how I've labeled that in my head, and that's how it makes sense and feels safe to me. I wonder if the violence here, if I feel like it's cartoonish or absurd, just because Miike is the only Asian cinema I really know. I mean, is that why I draw that comparison, or do you feel like those two the type of violence you see, does that share that commonality?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is really absurdist and cartoonish because this isn't, I don't want to give off the impression that this is serious Japanese cinema. I don't want Podmanity to walk away from this going, Japanese movies, what's with all this blood?
Right.
Because that's not, Japanese people make art films, they make dramas, they make comedies. It just so happens that Kill Bill's not based on the dramas or the comedies or the art films.
Yeah, right. It's based on the Grindhouse.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at Battle Royale, too, that was a lot more serious take, but really similar to Machine Girl. That was a movie that came out in Japan and then was brought overseas, and it became a cult hit for American audiences.
Sure.
I think The Machine Girl is probably a lot more of a cult hit in the United States than it is overseas. That's at least the impression I get from it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, we pick up on that stuff, and it becomes the same way when we talked about Ichi the Killer, this sort of, wow, this is weird, have you seen this kind of piece of cinema. So it could be a single source that has led me to both of these places. The fact that they come over here and this is what American audiences like from Japan.
Sure.
I will blame our own culture for my ignorance of Asian cinema and for going, isn't it kind of strange that both of these have cartoonish violence? But you can't deny that it's there, right? I mean,
oh yeah,
it can be, and it is often humorous.
Yeah.
You're talking now about this arm joke. I mean, that's not just the violence is so ridiculous we think it's humorous, that she accidentally loses her arm. And they set the joke up for several different scenes. And then she's wrestling. The fucking one-arm girl is arm wrestling.
Yeah.
It's a joke.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of jokes. And there's tit drills. I mean, these are they're dicking around.
It's jokes in camp. And the Super Mourner Gang.
Yeah,
and,
the Super Mourner
what's the other
gang.
one? Junior High something?
Junior High Shuriken Gang.
Oh my God, I love it.
Neither of which is related to the Crazy 88, though it is arguable that they may have some underground connections.
What I really love about The Machine Girl is something you pointed out a little bit. The violence, while it's absurdly over the top and way, way cartoonish, It's done really in a way in which it's reserved for these short bursts. The movie's fairly tame, and then when the violence comes, that's when there's really no rules. It's just completely unhinged. It's outlandish. Really anything can happen, and often does happen with this violence, even in terms of how they're accomplishing it. You know, where it's a little bit practical and then mostly let's just throw some stupid computer program at it. It doesn't matter what it looks like. And so you have this, I mean, it sounds ridiculous me even pointing that out. It's a movie about a girl with a machine gun for an arm. But the machine gun is a good example. While this machine gun looks really cheap, it feels great.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of how I feel about the whole movie. It's just the gun's fun to use, and you want her to have it on her arm. You know, it's sad when she's getting her arm filleted, not as much because you feel the character's pain, but because you're thinking, well, God damn it, when does she get the machine gun? Every time something happens, you're excited to see her lose her fucking arm, which is terrible. But you want her to put a gun on it and shoot at people. And when she's shooting, it's great. You know, they have that camera kind of mounted on there. It's the closest thing you really get to a first-person shooter film. And then the chainsaw. And then we do the same fucking thing. The chainsaw is great. And we're having a blast with the goddamn chainsaw. Really, the whole way through, I feel like I have a fairly good handle on it. Until there's the drill, bra, strobe light, urine party. But even through that, I mean, I feel like I still get it.
Well, and that's a kind of weird thing that became a big, I mean, you mentioned Robogeisha and Machine Girl, and then, I mean, you realize now that a big part of this Japanese extreme stuff is weird bodily mutilation.
Sure, it's true.
Arms are weapons. I mean, I don't want to, I feel like we shouldn't spoil the movie that we're going to do for the final chapter.
Oh, you want to keep it a secret?
I feel like we should.
We'll keep it a secret for a little while. That's fine.
I can say that when we get there, you are not going to believe the kind of bizarre stuff they use to create weapons. Because it's all about this spontaneous weapon generation.
Sure, yeah.
It's about being able to create violence without having to facilitate violence. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah. It was on that Battle Royale episode that we had Tim Kaiser, who
crazy Japanese,
listened to the show. He was sending in stuff at the time or whatever. He would every week. I think that guy sent us something.
It was awesome, and
he said "crazy Japanese," and that was his sort of tagline that stuck with him. But that's what it is. It's very crazy cinema. There's this sort of shock value to it.
Sure.
And, you know, I like to think in my head that all the crazy bodily fluids and the peeing that always seems to happen and the mutilation and all of that is Japan's government repressing their sexuality in film and pornography.
There's always that.
This is what you get, Japan. This is what you get.
Well, and another thing is that when we go back to Shogun Assassin and Sex and Fury and another film that we didn't talk about, but Master of the Flying Guillotine.
Oh, sure.
You get weird weapons. That's kind of what it was all about. And I mean, you know, that's still a natural thing. It's like,
well, we have that over
weapons.
Here. That's James Bond for us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
People like to see gadgets and weird stuff.
But Japan is bored with strange weapons. Like, the weapons have to be real fucking weird or attached to your body.
Sure.
Or you have to just, I mean...
They're 20 years past us. Yeah,
it's weaponry. Absolutely. And if sci-fi is the basis for invention, I am absolutely terrified when Robogeisha comes to fruition, when Machine Girl, when people are walking around with chainsaws for legs, or women don't, you know, anti-rape drill bras. You know, these things are the future of Japan's innovation.
You're terrified. I'm excited.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a website. And that's doublefeatureshow.com. Our glorious website will actually take you through the backlog of the Rocky history and the Asia experiment.
Definitely.
History.
There's a whole link section. When you go right on the page, it's on the right-hand side. Go down a little bit. And I think it's called Rocky plus Asia. And you can find all of that stuff on there.
Yeah, that sounds easy enough. And if you get confused, you can always email us at doublefeatureshow@gmail.com.
As with last time, still want to hear the feedback, still want to know, as especially if you're into the Japanese extreme stuff. Now that we're kind of getting a little bit more modern, a lot of people have seen it.
I'm really curious if there's anybody who started at point A and finally got here and didn't hate it.
Yeah, right. And if they plan to continue on, if you made it this far, you have to.
Yeah, I
you
guess
have
that's
to
true.
continue on. And then iTunes as well, where you can leave us a review that I seriously have not read in probably a year. They just make me depressed. I don't want to see people brag on the show. I don't want to do that. I assume maybe they're all really great and I just haven't been there in a year. It's a tragedy either way, really.
Yeah.
What are we doing on the show next time?
Next time we're going to do Stakeland and Red State.
Awesome.
That's really difficult to say.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tongue twister. I think there's a space in Steak Land, if that helps. That doesn't help.
It doesn't make
We
it
got through
any
all the
easier.
Japanese names. We can't say Steak Land and Red State.
Ugh.
So that's going to be, Dangerous Environments? Is that...
Watch more fucking film.
Bye. It's the scene where he's telling his son about the hustle, right? And
Sure.
his son is talking about urban blight, which is... we've never really covered urban blight. It's that sort of, when I think about that, I think about Spike Lee films, the early, like Do the Right Thing, that kind of stuff. Maybe a little bit when we talked about Candyman, because I know we talked about Cabrini Green and that area of Chicago.
It's like Sesame Street with more litter.
Yeah, it's definitely got a weird Sesame Street thing to it.
Mhm.
It's very strange that you mentioned that. A lot of boarded up windows. There's just a kind of look to urban blight. There's almost a visual aesthetic to it. It's one of those things that, I don't know, maybe for me, the reason I stick to that is we still have that in Chicago. That was very 90s, but the south side of Chicago is infamous for that.
Well, and it's not even just the south side. If you find yourself in the right areas of even the north or the west side, the area that I'm specifically thinking of to caricature urban blight in Chicago is the Little Italy neighborhood. I don't know if you've been down there.
No. Where's that at?
It's down by Taylor and Ashland.
Oh, okay, sure.
Off Taylor Street. And it just, it looks like gritty Sesame Street. That is...
it's the next best thing to having a time machine. You go down there and it really is. It feels like the early 90s. Part of that is the city develops around those areas.
Sure.
And that kind of causes, that's one of the causes of urban blight. The time capsule thing is a side product. It's not the reason I love this chapter of the Rocky saga.
I love it because there are fewer montages and fewer robots than the previous installment.
So you are catching on. Yeah, right from the beginning, the movie's a little bit different than the other Rocky films we've seen. We get our usual previous on Rocky, but there's also the freeze frames. It becomes a title sequence that makes it a little bit different.
Sure.
I think this, of all the recaps we've gotten, since we got the very first one and it was still fresh and humorous, this has actually been, legitimately speaking, the best recap. We're doing something a little bit different, and it feels like, we're not just doing this because all the other films did it. It's kind of honoring that tradition, but putting a little bit of a spin on it. It's a small thing, but when we get through that, we cut directly to naked Sylvester Stallone.
Or Jessica Alba.
Well, it's the scene from Machete. Isn't that weird?
It's the scene from Machete where Jessica Alba's in the shower completely naked, but you don't get to see anything.
Yeah, that's
the artful coy, except it's Sly Stallone. And it also, that means it came first, and that means that I guess Jessica Alba was actually just doing the Sly Stallone thing. And then you get into a really weird sexual thing for me.
Bizarre.
But Rocky's not about the sex. He's about the heart.
Naked Stallone is not the director this time around.
Well, boys, looks like you started the fun without me.
You're all sick. Every last one of you.
We're going to need a bigger gun.
What's the matter? You scared of things that go boom, boom?
Give me one goddamn reason why I shouldn't blow your goddamn brains all over that goddamn wall.
I'm joining Michael Kester this evening. My name is Eric, and as an audience, as a collective body of listeners, you are in fact listening to Double Feature. For now, until the show starts.
Until we mention chapters, and then...
About a minute and a half in, when you find out it's not Rocky V and the Machine Girl, but actually kids and happiness, you're probably going to bail. Only kidding. You like Rocky V and the Machine Girl. You think that's a fine setup.
I think, Rocky V and the Machine Girl is a great great double feature.
But we're going to spoil both of those movies. We have a feature in our show called Chapters.
It's a segment
It's
of
a
our
utility. It's a utility you can use. Yeah, it is also a segment where I talk about chapters for 20 minutes. I'm going to make it short. There's chapters. Look it up. Something else you should look up just briefly. If you're just now joining us here in Double Feature Land, Rocky V and The Machine Girl might seem like a strange double feature.
In fact, it's possibly, I can think of one pairing that I can think of would be a worse episode to
The last two Rocky Asia shows, would that be?
I think that would be the worst.
Was that actually your answer?
It was, yeah.
Oh, that's great. The Kill Bill ones were fine. We did, I don't know what happened there. Well, here's what happened. So we did Rocky and Shogun Assassin, and then we did Rocky 2 and Sex and Fury. We took a little break from our strict Asian cinema regimen, and then we did Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 with Rocky 3 and 4.
Right.
Now we are back in true form here. We are in now the third wave, the final wave of our Rocky films paired up with discovering Asian cinema centered around Kill Bill.
Yeah, see, the thing with Rocky is Rocky doesn't really come in waves. Well, maybe the sixth one is a different wave.
I don't know. We'll find out.
But the Asian films, since they're not actually all sequential, they're kind of in groups, in pairs.
So we did old Asian cinema. We did American-influenced Asian cinema.
And now we're doing Asian-influenced by American cinema, influenced by Asian cinema.
Oh my God. We should start with Rocky V. This is a capsule film for me.
Yeah.
Well, it's the film's from 1990. It's how I remember the early 90s.
Okay.
The early 90s being definitively different than when we talked about The Matrix, that being the late.
Yeah.
The late 90s for some reason is Spawn and trench coats.
Yeah,
for me.
that's true.
Spikes.
That did happen. Bad music. Oh my God.
Yeah, there was a lot of bad music, probably still in my iTunes library. Have you heard that Korn dubstep album yet, by the way?
Refuse.
No, you're right. There was a lot of bad music in the late 90s. But the early 90s had its fair share of that awful kind of Rob bass.
Yeah.
The Joey Ellis song in this movie, Go For It. I mean, I think that was, every Rocky film seems to have a song composed for it.
Yeah.
I can't find that song anywhere but Rocky V. If you Google it, all that comes up is videos from Rocky V. So I think that's probably what it is. But there was a lot of that. MC Hammer, I think, is on the soundtrack.
Oh my God.
If you watched In Living Color during the early 90s, all that kind of music that was on there was a very, I call it bad because it sounds very cheap and it has this kind of
bad quality.
It's kitschy, you know what I mean?
Sure.
It's kitschy, but there was stuff coming, NWA and a lot of legitimate stuff.
A lot of
hip hop.
Hip hop was really in its heyday in the late 80s and early 90s. That's when Ice-T got started. That's when Snoop Dogg and The Chronic all came out.
Right.
And then also that's where alternative rock started, same time.
Sure. So when you say bad music, you meant alternative rock specifically.
Mostly.
Well, that's what happened to rap. Is it got so popular that we had pop rap. We had MC Hammer.
Sure.
We also had Dirty City Streets, and that's I think that's a lot of why this is kind of a capsule film. Why it feels like that